Alright, so welcome back. Today we're going to be covering the France's failed invasion of Germany in 1939. Our previous video was about basically Poland in 1939 and their defense. And in one of those things they mentioned that France moved into the Saarland. And they ran into basically very little resistance, but they fell back to the Maginot Line. And there wasn't a lot of discussion or coverage of that, and I guess they're going to cover it here. I'll leave the link to their video below in the description. I believe you should go check it out. I'll try to add anything if I can. I know a little bit more about France and Poland, at least their military structure wise and why it was the way it was. But yeah, otherwise, we shall get to it.
It is the fall of 1939 and of Poland. Marshal Eduard Ritz-Schmigli meets with his staff. Though the Poles fight with all the zeal they can muster, the Germans continue to gain ground. The young republic is firmly on the back foot, teetering over the precipice. Ritz-Schmigli assures his subordinates that they only have to hold out long enough for the French and British to muster their forces. The twin empires will sweep into Germany from the west, and between them, the three allies will surely crush the Nazis and save Poland. Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. Even casual observers will know that Marshal Ritz-Schmigli's faith in his French and British allies was, shall we say, misplaced. Poland fell to the combined invasion of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union as France and Britain looked on, seemingly uncaringly. But history continues to resist simplicity, and the German invasion would set off a chain of events that would lead to a French invasion of Germany in 1939. An invasion pushed into the margins of history by its utter irrelevance in the face of the French defeat the following year. In this video, we will turn our attention to those margins and examine the Saar Offensive, France's failed invasion of Nazi Germany. While the performance of the French military early in the Second World War is often the subject of much mockery, their contributions to the field of cryptology are often overlooked. French cryptologists were among the first to break the famous Enigma machine, working in close cooperation with Polish and British colleagues to give the Allies a decisive advantage in the information war against the Axis powers. This brings us neatly to the sponsor of today's video, NordVPN, whose industry-leading cybersecurity features promise to keep your classified data safe from any military rivals. Now, every subscription to NordVPN comes with access to the Threat Protection feature, which actively neutralizes cyber threats before they can damage your devices. Threat Protection warns you of malware and malicious websites, while blocking intrusive ads and making your internet experience safer, smoother, and more secure. Support our channel today, get an exclusive deal, and try NordVPN risk-free for 30 days with their money-back guarantee by signing up with the link in the description below.
Or you could pull what France did and just use handwritten messages for writers.
French Prime Minister Edouard Daladier and Foreign Minister Georges Bonnet received word of the Nazi invasion on September 1st, the morning after it had begun. France had a defensive treaty with Poland, but when the Polish ambassador Juliusz Łukasiewicz called to personally alert Bonnet to the danger his country faced, Bonnet had only bad news to share. The French constitution prohibited France from going to war with Germany or even presenting Hitler with a last-ditch ultimatum without the input of the French legislature, most of whom were on holiday.
God, this sounds like America. Holy... Congress is out of session, therefore we cannot help you. That's like the biggest legal loophole. Wow, that's real shit. That's real shit for Poland.
Bonnet told Łukasiewicz the fate of his country would have to wait until the next day, when the French lawmakers would reconvene. As September 1st dragged into September 2nd, the Nazis drove deeper into Poland, while the traditionally bellicose Duce of Italy, Benito Mussolini, began calling loudly for a summit to resolve the Polish issue diplomatically. Bonnet echoed Mussolini's calls, angering British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and Foreign Secretary Lord Halifax. French Chief of Staff Maurice Gamelin wrote in his diary that The British were insisting that hostilities should begin as soon as possible in order to give some useful assistance to Poland without delay. They feared, I believe, that we would hesitate at the last moment.
It's almost like they were right.
In reality, the French had already begun mobilizing their forces, but Gamelin and his staff pushed their prime minister and Bonnet for time to organize an evacuation of French citizens along the German border. Should war break out?
That should have been done well beforehand. That's on him. That's on the country, France, not. It's like the U.S. telling everyone in Afghanistan to get the fuck out of Afghanistan, like a month and a half prior to the fall of Kabul. Now, people don't obviously heed those warnings, but that's different.
Out now, it would be the French army and people who would bear the brunt of it until the British could deploy to the continent, which meant days of fighting before even the smallest group of Tommies arrived. And so, even as the British pushed for an immediate response, Axis and Allied diplomats exchanged furious cables, the Luftwaffe rained bombs on Polish cities, and the Wehrmacht drove deep into the embattled young republic. The French played for time as they organized their side of the chessboard. September 3rd would see the die cast for war. As an initial Polish defense at Moiva collapsed, the talks between the diplomats were ended by French ambassador to Germany, Robert Coulanges, who informed Joachim von Ribbentrop that at 5 p.m. that day, France and Germany would be at war unless hostile action against Poland ceased. Gamelin.
Good enough on that guy. Good enough on Gamelin for saying, hey, look, you don't stop, and at 5 p.m., we're going in.
Still desperate for time, gave a secret order that all branches of the French armed forces were to adopt a war footing at 5 a.m. September 4th, a full 12 hours after the declaration.
God damn it. I just praised the French fucking high command, and they fuck it up again. Not the French soldier, mind you. French soldier was very good. The French high command is a fucking train wreck.
And when the British RAF would begin moving against German targets. It should be noted that Gamelin's seeming gun-shyness was not shared by the French people. They regarded war with Germany as a sense of dutiful determination. Over 4.5 million Frenchmen were called up in the mobilization, and they evinced high spirits and a desire to stop German aggression.
See what I mean? The French soldiers were very motivated. They were very well. Some of the units were very well trained. A lot of them were reservists still, but they had some training, and they called 4.5 million of them. They weren't. The France's army was not the problem. It was the fucking officer corps and high command that was a problem. And Charles de Gaulle said a lot about this shit. He even wrote a book, I think, about how the situation was this fucked up. He was very adamant about a whole bunch of shit that could have been changed, and it didn't.
Those on the home front were similarly tired of Nazi expansionism. Il faut en finir, or enough is enough, became a refrain among the civilian population. However, there were some who foresaw calamity should France go to war with Germany. Nazi sympathizers and French fascists warned anyone who would listen that to stand against Hitler was to court destruction. The vast majority of the French people were...
Yeah, but those people were idiots, let's be honest. Even if they didn't come in for Poland, France, Hitler was going to attack France anyway.
Were confident of victory, however, and these contrarian fascists were paid little mind. France formally went to war on September 3rd, but despite her extensive mobilization, popular history tells us little else actually happened until Germany invaded in 1940, a period of months known as the Sitzkrieg, or Phony War. This characterization is entirely untrue. Not only was the Polish invasion ongoing with Krakow falling on September 6th, but the French would do something completely unexpected. Back in May of 1939, Gamelin had assured his Polish counterparts that a German invasion would be answered with French military action, promising that it would take 2 weeks at the most for the cavalry to arrive. But behind closed doors, Gamelin told the British, who were equally entangled with the Poles, that he did not intend to discourage his men by launching offensives willy-nilly, stating, "I shall not begin the war by a Battle of Verdun." This reflected a shift toward defensive warfare in the minds of French military planners, as evidenced by the construction of the Maginot Line.
Okay, so why he means like it won't be another Verdun is because Verdun was very important to France at this time. And even at this time and beforehand, right? But Verdun was a very bloody battle for France. France lost a considerable amount of its population in the First World War. If I remember correctly, I think it was around 10%. That might be a little too high, but it's somewhere around there. It was absolutely devastating. So 10% of the male population, I think, is a better term, of the young adult male population. And that was absolutely devastating for France. And you can see why they wanted a defensive mentality mindset of we need to preserve our manpower to fight Germany. Germany also had more population than France at this time too, which is another factor why France was being very defensive here. Now, does that mean that they were right? Fuck no, that does not mean they were right to abandon Poland and sit on their ass. It's just one of the reasons why they did.
But France had a duty to perform, and Gamelin may have been a cautious man, but he did not go back on his nation's word. On September 7th, 1939, as the Polish High Command fled the Nazi advance on Warsaw, and after much build-up and consideration, Gamelin ordered a French invasion of Germany.
Give the man some credit, he actually followed through.
The night of the 7th would see 11 French divisions pour over the German border on a 15-mile or roughly 24-kilometer front southeast of Saarbrücken, dubbed the Kadenbronn Salient, with the goal of drawing German forces away from Poland. A second wave was launched on the 9th, and the reinforced French would advance slowly into Nazi territory.
Okay, so this is the 15 divisions. I'm seeing maybe 4 divisions of Germans on the other side. At least it's what this should mean in theory.
Resistance was light, and the French primarily had to contend with minefields and booby traps that inflicted relatively low casualties. But when battle was joined, it was intense, reminding many of the invaders of the First World War. Corporal Armand Petitjean wrote of spending 3 days under mortar fire while taking shelter in a water pipe 80 centimeters below ground and knee-deep in the mud. If the ceiling collapses, we are stuck. Perhaps taking a page from their chief of staff's book, Doctrine on the Ground called for caution above all, a mindset that helped reduce losses, but this risk aversion also took root in the French government at large, reducing effectiveness as much as it did casualties. Prime Minister Daladier vigorously vetoed any RAF moves to bomb Germany, fearful that the Luftwaffe would visit destruction on Paris.
Again, they wanted a limited war. And they didn't want to escalate things unnecessarily. That's the mindset. You know, with 2020 hindsight, that shit was going to fucking happen anyway. Now, the idea of a limited war on a continental scale hasn't been true since World War I. And then, if you're like, then they didn't know. No, they did know what a fucking limited war was. And this wasn't a limited war at this point. If they're calling in France, Britain, Germany, and Poland's already in the war, it's no longer a limited war. It is an actual war.
Winston Churchill presented a plan dubbed Royal Marine to float naval mines down the Rhine, damaging shipping and infrastructure, until Daladier again protested in fear the Germans would do the same to the Seine.
I don't know why the fuck he thought that was true. Germany's navy was... at best, Germany's navy was a defensive navy that could defend Kiel, the Kiel Canal, at best at this point, because I don't even think they finished the Scharnhorst or Gneisenau. God forbid the Bismarck and the Tirpitz weren't even done yet either. Yeah.
The hamstrung RAF would ultimately bomb Germany with a torrent of highly destructive leaflets as the half-hearted offensive half-intensified. Meanwhile, a second French thrust was launched in the west of Germany, with the 21st Motorized Infantry taking extensive territory, occupying the heights around Biel and woodlands around Saarbrücken.
This looks like 2 divisions versus 3, and then we have way more on their right too.
This new group brought the French up to a staggering 85 divisions in the region, against which the German had arrayed 34.
Holy fuck, 85 versus 34? My god, yeah, they could easily break through this. Wow.
With a full 23 of them being reservist divisions with little training nor equipment.
Yeah, even if they took out 23, what is it, 84 minus 23, that still gives you around 60-something divisions of fully trained professional soldiers against 34. And these 34, I guarantee you, were also somewhat reserve divisions, because the main ones were in Poland fighting.
Panzer divisions and motorized infantry were all in Poland, giving the French absolute dominance in the armor and maneuverability stakes.
As I said, yeah, all the primary divisions Germany had, the professional guys, are all in Poland. The guys that were over here were the reservists of the German army, more or less.
The French occupied a position that would make any general green with envy, poised to push deep into enemy territory with as little resistance as an elephant would face in stomping on a ground-bound sloth. The French continued to advance cautiously until September 12th, when Gamelin gave his men a fateful order. They would take the momentum of their advance and utterly squander it. Gamelin ordered a complete halt to offensive operations September 12th. He further ordered his men to prepare for an immediate retreat, as he had become convinced that a German counterattack through Belgium was imminent. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union would invade Poland on September 17th, sealing the fate of the young republic and showing the world that Hitler and Stalin were all too happy to glut themselves on the independence of other nations.
Okay, so the fallback order doesn't really make sense. Kind of doesn't make sense, okay? So France's whole philosophy of building the fucking Maginot Line in the first place was to basically, if they're going to fight on home soil, they're going to fight in a very defensive position and cause Germany casualties. But they wanted to push into Germany because later the plan was to fight in Belgium, right? And their whole idea was to fight not on French soil again. That's their whole idea here. And they have taken ground, and they can keep advancing. And they would fight in Germany instead of France, which was their whole idea. To give a fallback order back to the Maginot Line is like counterintuitive. First, you lost all your momentum. Second, all the land you gained, you're just giving it back up for free.
Sudden stop in even these paltry attacks incensed Gamelin's subordinates. Charles de Gaulle, future Free French president and commander of an armored group in the anemic offensive, called the effort a few demonstrations. André Beaufry, noted strategist, railed that the operation was nothing. General Gamelin, true to character, decided to make no more than a gesture. That was our aid to Poland. By the time
So, as you can see, Charles de Gaulle and all those guys are like, this is fucking stupid. We could have easily broke through, gone further, but what we did was basically, we honored our alliance by, going in there and immediately pulling back.
Time Gamelin ordered an end to the offensive operations, the Nazis had been laying siege to the Polish capital of Warsaw for 4 days, a siege that would ultimately end on September 28th. Perhaps with the Nazis at the gates of the Polish capital, Gamelin thought that the fall of Poland was inevitable, and this played into his decision to bring the French invasion to a halt. Regardless of its genesis, Gamelin would take his logic to Dalady, who gave his begrudging assent to the shift to a defensive posture. The men decided not to inform the rest of Dalady's cabinet about the decision, and an immediate withdrawal from Germany was ordered in the utmost secrecy. Troops were only withdrawn under the cover of darkness, and a screening force left in contact with the enemy to give the illusion of continued battle.
Seems all very fucking shady for retreating. Don't informing your cabinet. I mean, there's a lot of reasons the Third French Republic failed and died, and the fourth one rose out of that, which is the one we have today. I think it might be the fifth. But yeah, Charles de Gaulle was like, yeah, this system right here broke because a lot of these higher guys were political appointees from basically politician appointments, and they did not trust their army very much at all because they feared a coup. So therefore, they didn't train their guys. They didn't have a lot of permanent tank units. There's a whole list of reasons as to why France was like this.
German troops began to return from conquering Poland toward the end of September, reinforcing their fellows and launching the counteroffensive that Gamelin so dreaded. The Polish government in exile arrived in Paris on September 28th. Nazi and Soviet forces would complete the latest partition of Poland on October 6th, and the French would complete their evacuation of the Saar region on October 17th, with the Germans hot on their heels and eager to take a retaliatory bite out of France. The Wehrmacht recovered every inch of territory seized in the French effort, but their attempts to go into France were largely unsuccessful. With the status quo antebellum largely restored, the phony war could well and truly begin. Fighting largely ceased until the German invasion of France in May of 1940. The Tsar offensive was more than a strategic failure. It laid bare the critical flaws in the French army, and most critically, its highest commander. Gamelin was a man obsessed with defense, unwilling to commit to anything but a perfunctory offense. The timidity with which he treated the Tsar operations, in which he enjoyed unquestioned superiority in men and materiel until the literal last minutes.
Literal last minute. Remember, literal last minute could have made a massive progress.
Utterly confounded the Germans. Alfred Jodl declared, "If we did not collapse in 1939, that was due to the fact that during the Polish campaign, the approximately 110 French and British divisions in the West were held completely inactive against the 23 German divisions."
Yeah, even Germany realized that what they were doing in Poland was a gamble, that they wouldn't push that far, and even they didn't believe fucking France would be this stupid, and not push them even as much as they did, even like really far back. Because they're, again, 23 divisions. If once the British got over there, they'd have 110. And Belgium is his own fucking video of why they weren't in the war. But 110 divisions against Germany, and especially if you can open up that front, that's massive. They'd have to pull forces back from Poland.
General Siegfried Westphal, aide to Erwin Rommel and later chief of staff for von Rundstedt, wrote that if the French had actually tried, they could have blazed from the French border to the Rhine River in 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. That's what they said. I don't know if that would have actually been possible, but again, they did have 85 divisions versus like 23, so it very much could have been.
This sentiment was shared by Franz Halder, Chief of Army High Command, who opined, if the French had used the opportunity presented by the engagement of nearly all of our forces in Poland, they would have been able to cross the Rhine without our being able to prevent it, and would have threatened the Ruhr, which was decisive for the German conduct of the war.
And it very much was. If they could take the Ruhr, it really wouldn't be World War II then. It would be a war for a year and maybe year and a half at that point.
Gamelin was well and truly presented with an opportunity to change the course of history and let it pass him by.
One man can't decide the fate of millions. It is just a fact of life. There are very few people. There's a lot of people in power. A few of those people can change the outcome of the entire world for everyone.
Gamelin's passivity would have repercussions throughout the French army. The men who marched into the Tsar were, as said before, in high spirits and ready to counteract Nazi aggression. But as they found their offensive stalling out due to not enemy effort but their commander's apparent caution, morale plummeted.
And it makes sense, right? Like you have all this momentum behind you, and you're like, we're literally facing nothing, but our lieutenant or captain back there is like fucking sitting on his ass, and we're not moving as fast as we could be. And then you have to give it all up. Of course, morale's going to drop after that.
Inaction was the primary factor cited, and it created an atmosphere of depression and carelessness. The French had come to strike back, defend Poland, and stop Hitler once and for all.
That's actually a very motivating factor if you think about it. Those three things would be very motivating for regular soldiers, but
instead, they were marching from deserted village to deserted village, wandering through minefields and occasionally meeting some intense but limited German resistance. French casualties totaled 1,878 for the operation, while the Germans acknowledged a total of 666, a relatively low number compared to the rest of the war.
Remember, Poland suffered 800,000 to 1.2 million casualties in their invasion of their country. This is minuscule numbers. It's not even a full regiment of French dead. Well, it might be. It depends on how you... Usually it's 3,000 people, but yeah, Germany lost around a battalion, so...
A war that the Nazis would soon bring to France's doorstep, and the Germans would prove far more aggressive than the toothless French under Gamelin.
There's a lot of reasons as to why Germany was also very aggressive like that, mostly because they had no fucking choice. It was either go for broke or go home. But that's Invasion of France video that we can cover later.
Between the end of the Tsar offensive and the fall of France, the Allies would do little more than mark time. Modern historians cite this period of inaction as a critical blunder, a time in which the Allies could have refined their strategies and built up materiel as the Germans did. Whether this was simple war wariness, some mistaken belief that Hitler was finally sated, or disbelief that another conflict was inevitable is debated to this day. What we can say is that the Tsar offensive was an utter failure, succeeding in penetrating German territory and placing the French in a position to well and truly take the war to Hitler, only to collapse under the weight of its commander's fear. Could the French have ended the Second World War in its opening months? Could an Anglo-French force, riding the momentum of a vigorous offensive in the Tsar region, come up behind the Wehrmacht as they arrayed their full strength against Poland, and brought the Bronze Eagle crashing down to earth? That's a question for the alternate historians out there.
Yeah, it is, and it is quite very possible that it could have ended in 4041. Um, but yeah, I guess that's just one of those things. We'll never really know. All right, so that's the end of the video. Yeah, it kind of pissed me off a little bit. I guess you could probably see that. It's France had a lot of problems. None of them were really with the soldiers. There was a lot of malaise with the people of France in general of war weariness. But by the time it was 1939, again, as they stated, they were really ready to go and bash Hitler's face in and take this down because this was going too far. But again, just the officers and it was really just the high command. I wouldn't even really say officers because all the colonels, lieutenant colonels, and guys were all really fired up to do this. Now, again, there will be some that weren't. Like Charles de Gaulle was. Some of the other officers that he mentioned would be. But the high command was just utterly afraid of a repeat of Verdun, which is understandable. But again, you're supposed to be leading your country's defenses, and also trying to win the war, not just sitting on your ass. That eventually came to bite them in the ass. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Hope you guys enjoyed my reaction and my commentary on it, I guess. Leave below if you like that video. Otherwise, on your screen right up there should be what's happened in Poland during this time. And you can click up there. Otherwise, I shall see you people next time.